Our next speaker is Domicele Jonauskaite. I hope I pronounce it well. She's an experimental color psychologist studying cognitive and affective connotations of color. Her studies are based on scientifically valid approaches, which allows her to validate or debunk myths in color psychology. More recently, she has expanded her research to aesthetics and art. Domicele is currently based at the University of Vienna in Austria. Previously, she obtained a PhD degree in psychology from the University of Lausanne, Switzerland. Her research positions have been supported by 2 career fellowship grants from the Swiss National Science Foundation, together with Christine Moore, Deborah Epikoko, and Neil Dahl. They have founded the Color Experience platform, designed to disseminate scientifically validated empirical research on psychological effects of color. She is also co-authoring blog posts for Psychology Today. And you can also find the links to these, to Psychology Today and to the Color Experience platform on our website. The word is yours, Domicele.
So hello, everyone. Thank you very much for this invitation and happy Color Day, nearly. So let me share the screen and talk about color psychology. So can you see it well? Okay, great.
Yes.
Okay, so today I would like to talk with you about the current state of research on color and emotion associations, and and look at it from the scientific perspective. So let's dive right into it, and let's start with the question, what is color psychology? So the basic idea of color psychology is that color has an influence on human psychological functioning, may it be emotion, cognition, attention, memory, perception, and so on. And this idea of color psychology has become very popular in the media, in the areas outside of psychology, such as design, architecture, fashion, marketing, and so on. And I found a couple of examples to show you in different languages. So I'm sure that you are familiar with these websites and these kinds of claims that are being made about how color can influence us. And although there are many claims around us in the media, and these claims seem to be kind of reappearing over and over again, which reinforces their validity. In fact, many of the websites and the claims are not based on any scientific evidence, which means that they are rather opinions of the authors, and they don't necessarily apply to many other people. So I invite you to take a critical look at popular color psychology and to kind of, when you read these things, just take them a little bit with a grain of salt. And today I would like to show you what has been done so far from the scientific perspective. So if we look together at the things that are in the popular media, so one idea is that there is weak scientific basis for now, and we hope to change that. The other idea is that there is often a confusion of psychological constructs. And what I mean by that is that often many things are kind of jumbled together. So people talk about influence on emotion and then change to attention or memory. And kind of all of these things, they are actually different areas in psychology. And we have to separate and to look at one thing at a time. Otherwise, we can't really tell much about anything at all. Then there is also this idea of presumed universality. So often if you read something, okay, I'll give you an example, like you read blue is a calming color, and it's not really specified, where it applies. So it seems that it applies to everyone in the world, no matter their age, their location, where they live, and so on. And there's also the idea of the importance of perception. And here, what I mean by that is, well, kind of obviously, we need to look at the colors in order to have the effects of them. So for example, if blue is a calming color, to be calmed, we need to be looking at blue. Okay, so to obtain scientific evidence for these kind of claims, we must design rigorous and reproducible scientific studies, which unfortunately take a lot of time and effort. So today, as I said, we have to look at one thing at a time. So I will present you research on emotions, how colors and emotions are associated, because this is my area of expertise. And I will talk a little bit about the ideas of universality and perception, and how we can start looking at these questions. What has been done so far? Quite a lot and not so much at the same time. So we can trace back, we can go back to Aristotle. Almost anything can be traced back to ancient Greeks. And Aristotle thought about these ideas, and he wrote that colors are a source of pleasure and delight, yet they neither corrupt us nor make us wiser. And since psychology became a science on its own at the beginning of 20th century, we can find over 100 empirical studies linking colors and emotions together in adult healthy populations. So it seems that there is quite a lot already in the literature. But the problem is that there is a lack of systematic investigations. And what I mean by systematic investigations is that often researchers work in different fields, and they become interested by color or by emotion. They do one study, and then they go on working on something else. So we have a lot of disparate, one study here and one study there, and there are very few groups of researchers who would be taking the same methodology and applying it over and over again in different populations to actually to build a scientific basis, to build our understanding. So I will be focusing on our work that we started at the University of Lausanne over the last 7 years, and I will show you what we have done so far in this area. So our methodology is the International Calimotion Association survey. Of course, we do other studies as well, but this is like the main one that I would like to show to you today. And in this survey, we are working with color terms. So we have 12 color terms. And as you see here at the bottom, we have 46 languages. So all these terms are translated in the 46 languages, and our participants always complete this survey in their native language, which we believe is important. And then in the survey, participants have to think what emotions they associate with each color term. So this is more or less what it looks like, and I will zoom in on the emotions in a minute. We also have a version where we work with actual colors, and I will talk about it as well. But since there are limitations on screen calibrations and reproducible representation of color online, so this first survey is with color terms. So as emotions, we using the Geneva emotion wheel, and this is a wonderful tool also based on research. There are 20 emotions organized in a circle, and the more similar emotions are placed closer to each other, and they are also organized along 2 axes. So there is the first axis is valence. So we have 10 positive emotions on the right, and we have 10 negative emotions on the left. And the second axis is called power or dominance or potency. And this is, so the high power emotions are at the top and the low power emotions are at the bottom. So these would be high power emotions are the ones that make us act and empower, and low power emotions are the ones which kind of freeze or calm us, depending, on the valence. So the good thing about this tool is that we can at the same time look at individual emotions, and we can also look at affective dimensions. We can group emotions according to their underlying affective dimensions. Okay, so if you were a participant in our survey, this is what would happen. You would see a color term written in black. in your native language, and you would be given the Geneva emotion wheel and asked to choose emotions that you associate with this color term. There's also an option, no emotion or different emotion. So if participant thinks that no, this color has no associations, they click on no emotion. And if they think that we missed something in this wheel, they are free to type any emotion or emotions that they wish. So for example, if you present it with red, my guess would be that you might say it's associated with love. And then we have these circles of increasing size, which indicate the intensity of emotion. So maybe you think that love is strong, and then maybe you also think it's associated with anger, but perhaps not as strong as love. So this is a possibility. And of course, there are many different combinations of how our participants respond. Some choose one association, some choose 20, some choose 17 or 2 or 3. So there are a lot of different possibilities. And colors differ on how many associations participants on average give. So currently, so this is a large-scale international survey that we are increasing almost every day. As I said, we started actually in 2013, which is a long time ago. And at the moment, we have collaborators from over 80 countries. So this is our map of collaborators. You can also find them on our website. And with the survey currently runs in 46 languages, but we are still doing some new translations. And I just wanted to give you a peek of what it looks like if you were completing the survey in a different language. So for example, we have a French or German, Lithuanian as well, which is my native language. And then we also have other languages with different writing scripts. And finally, we had some languages where, so like Arabic and Hebrew, where the writing direction is not from left to right, but from right to left. So we had a lot of technical challenges to kind of reverse the wheel and reverse the entire survey and so on. So this is just a little peek of what our survey looks like. So maybe we are ready to hear some results. So I will first present you results on affective dimensions, as I said, grouping emotions together, and then on individual emotions. So what we have learned so far. Okay, so let me walk you through this heat map, or what we call the color emotion association matrix. So on this matrix, we have the 20 emotions on the y-axis that I just presented to you, and we have the 12 color terms on the x-axis. And each square represents the, you can think about it as a percentage of participants who chose the association. And the redder, the darker the square, the more participants chose this association. And what we can see here straight away is that kind of the top part of this heat map is darker than the bottom part, which means that most colors are associated more with positive than negative emotions. And then we have two color terms, gray and black, which are associated more with negative than positive emotions. One of the take-home messages from this research, but not only mine, but also what we find in the literature over and over again, is that more positive emotions are associated with lighter colors and also more saturated, more chromatic colors. This is like a very, very strong association between lightness and positivity, and you can find it over and over again. But we were also interested in specific emotion associations. This is why we have the 20 emotions. So what can we tell about the specific associations? So first of all, red is a very interesting color because it's associated both with positive and negative emotions. And these emotions are specific. So red is associated with love, but also hate and anger. Now, if we look at the lighter version of red, pink, and I already told you that lighter colors are associated with more positive emotions. Pink is also associated with love, but it doesn't have the negative end of the associations. Pink is also associated with other positive emotions like amusement, joy, pleasure. So it's not a very specific association, more kind of diffused. Another strong association that we find overall is association between yellow and joy. And then if we look at the dark version of yellow, which is brown, it's not associated with joy anymore, it's associated with disgust. So brown would be the third color that is associated with more negative than positive emotions. But in principle, brown is, I would say it's one of the most emotionally neutral colors, apart from this association with disgust. You can see that the squares are rather faint. And then white is associated with relief. Gray and black are associated both with sadness, although black a little bit more strongly. And there's also a difference between the two colors, with black being associated with fear, hate, and anger, whereas gray is more associated with disappointment. So what you can take from this heat map is that most colors are associated with many individual emotions. And most emotions are also associated with many colors, which means that these associations are many to many and not one to one. It's not like we have one color and it means one emotion and one emotion only, and and this emotion is not represented by any other color. And I think that also we of course need to think about context effects. And I think that this conclusion is going probably in line with your own observations. And I wanted to present you now a couple of our studies that we did in this from this international, within the framework of the International Color Emotion Association survey. As I said, we constantly keep collecting data and we keep extracting the data and analyzing it in different ways. And these are kind of the first results that we have. So already in 2020, we published an article on 30 nations and conducted, I will show you the nations. So the 30 nations conducted in 22 languages and over 4,500 participants. And this is what we found across 30 nations. These were the associations between colors and emotions. And I had zoomed in on this heat map just before, and we already investigated, what colors are associated with what emotions. But the question that we had is whether, are there cultural differences, or in other words, if we look at this heat map, does it make sense in other countries of the world, or is it just a meaningless average? And one way of doing it is creating such heat maps for every country that we have. So here I have an example for Switzerland, because I was based in Switzerland, and you can see already that kind of the pattern, of which emotions are chosen for which colors are quite similar between the 30 nations and Switzerland. But Switzerland, Swiss participants, in principle, the squares are darker. It means that for some associations, there is more agreement between participants. So, okay, this is something that we see visually. So what can we do statistically? And what we can do statistically is to correlate the two matrices. And we find a correlation of 0.93, which is a very high correlation. Just to remind you, 0 would mean that there is no similarity between the two matrices, and 1 would be that they are completely identical. Here we're talking about the pattern, kind of the relief of the associations, and not the strength of associations. So 0.93, roughly, we could think about it as 93% similarity. So they are very, very similar. So we did this now for Switzerland, and we can do that for all the 30 nations that we studied. So I will show you another figure that we created. So these are basically the correlations. So Switzerland was here with a 0.93, and you can see that out of the 30 nations, 27 of them had correlations higher than 0.8, with an average correlation being 0.88, which is, I would say, extremely high. We had 3 nations that had slightly lower correlations, but still they were nearly between 0.7 and 0.8, so still very high. And these nations were Azerbaijan, Nigeria, and Egypt. Of course, we can see that the correlation is not one, so it's not perfect. There is still some room for cultural variability, and what we can do now with this big data. So for example, we looked whether nations that live geographically closer or speak more similar languages also associate colors and emotions more similarly. And this is exactly what we found. So these are now in correlations between individual nations, and so I will just give you the digested result is that indeed color and emotion associations were more similar when participants spoke more linguistically related languages or the same languages. So for example, Spanish and Italian speakers would have more similar associations than Spanish and Chinese speakers. And another result was that participants who lived geographically closer also had more similar associations, but the geographical closeness explained less variance than linguistic similarity. So language seems to be more important than geography. And I wanted to show you another study. Did it work? Another study where we kind of zoom in on this question. Okay, so what does it mean, geographic proximity? So this is an example of the association between yellow and joy. So again, it's the same survey. Now we have 55 countries with over 6,500 participants. And the colors of the nations indicate how the percentage of participants in the nation that who thought that joy and yellow are associated together. And you can see there's an enormous variation in how joyful yellow is perceived, going from only 5% in Egypt to 86% in Finland. And clearly already we can see that there is some kind of systematicity in these in the likelihood of associating yellow and joy together. And when we run statistical models, we found that yellow and joy were more likely to be associated when participants lived further away from the equator, and when annual precipitation in the country of residence was higher. In other words, participants who lived in colder and rainier countries also thought that yellow and joy are associated more strongly. What was not a significant predictor was the number of daylight hours at the time of the survey completion. So for example, now we would have, in Europe, we would have about 12 daylight hours a day. And then in summer we have more, and in winter we have fewer. So this could be taken as a proxy of seasonal effects. And it shows that color emotion associations are relatively stable over time, and they vary based on geographical location. And I'm really excited to show you these most recent results. We are now working on a publication where we managed to boost our sample of countries to 73 populations and over 11,000 of participants. I'm really excited about this, and I wanted to show you that, okay, so these are the countries that we have, and here, the darker the country, the more participants we have, so it's just the number of participants. And I wanted to show you just this figure, something what I showed you before, that we are replicating this finding of universality or high degree of shared Calimotion associations in 73 populations now. And now with 73 populations, the average degree of similarity, it's still 0.88. So it's kind of wonderful that we added more nations outside of Europe, and we're still finding the same high degree of similarity. And now we have 6 nations that have associations between 0.7 and 0.8, so slightly lower. And these nations are, again, of course, Egypt, Azerbaijan, and Nigeria, but we also have Togo, Mongolia, and Palestine. So what have we learned so far? Let me give you some digested results. So throughout our research, we have learned that colors and emotions are associated systematically, and that these associations are many-to-many and not one-to-one. We have learned that color emotion associations are universal in the meaning that they are shared across the world. but that they are further modulated by perceptual and linguistic experiences. And here I talked about the finding that participants who live geographically closer or speak more related languages also associate colors and emotions even more similarly. And the fourth conclusion is that color emotion associations have a strong conceptual component, and they suggest that these associations are abstract rather than driven by our direct visual or emotional affective experience. So I haven't had chance to show you data on this last point. So I want to really briefly introduce two studies and kind of give digested results on this idea of conceptual processing of color. So in one study, we were interested in comparing emotion associations with colors presented as visual experiences versus as words. And when you compare the two, we find again quite a high correlation of 0.82. These are the studies that we ran in the lab where we could calibrate the screens and ensure that color presentation is the same across all participants. So in principle, as long as you present focal colors, so-called the best examples of colors for these color categories named by the color terms, we get very similar associations. And the second study was conducted with colorblind people. And I saw already there was a question in the chat for another talk also about colorblindness. And we did different variations, but in one, I think most crucial is the comparison between when presenting physical samples of colors, either to non-colorblind or colorblind participants. And obviously for colorblind men, these colors look different. Some of the colors look different, and yet the correlation between the two samples was also very high, suggesting that it's really the concept that these colorblind men were associating. And when you present them the best examples of colors, they are quite easy to recognize. They are overtrained from childhood to know that, which shade of green is called red and which shade of green is called green. So they can name these colors. And once they name it, they go with very similar associations as non-colorblind participants. So it means that a lot of these color emotion associations are really abstract. It's the knowledge that we have. So I would like to close my talk with some open questions, very general open questions and future directions in this line of research. So the first idea that I would like to put forward is that color emotion associations are different from color preferences, and we also need to investigate this distinction further. What I mean by that, if you like a color, it doesn't mean that you associate that color with positive emotions, and vice versa. If you dislike the color, it doesn't mean you associate it with negative emotions. And here I am showing you just an example of yellow. So I spoke that yellow as a word was associated with joy. And also in another study where we induced the feeling of joy was mostly matched to yellow and other warm hues. When we asked participants to pick their least favorite color, they also seem to be picking a lot of yellows, oranges, purple, and pink. And you can see that somehow these two figures are rather similar. So what's going on? It's a color of joy, and yet it's a least liked color. And another point is that color emotion associations, what I presented you so far, give little information about actually felt emotions. So it doesn't necessarily mean that if you look at yellow, you will feel joyful, or if you look at red, you will feel love or anger at the same time. This is just something that people kind of associate in an abstract, in a symbolic way. And I think this kind of piece of information is very important for the applied context, because the moment you want to, for example, suggest the best color for the walls, or you are working with chromotherapy, it's important not to take this research on conceptual associations at face value and just directly translate it into applied contexts. So do you want to learn more about experimental color psychology? Then you can read about, you can either visit our website, Color Experience, or you can read our blog post on Psychology Today, where we try to digest our research studies. For example, we have also digested a study on personality and color preferences in a kind of accessible manner to as broad audience as possible. And I'm writing these blog posts together with Professor Christine Moore. If you want to participate, now we have a second version of the survey. So in this survey, in this second version, we are actually showing physical colors online, and I'm happy to explain, how we try to go around the problem of calibration if you're interested in this during the questions. And I would like to thank you for listening on this Sunday. I would like to thank my Christine Moore, who was my PhD supervisor and now a very close collaborator, and also Deborah and Julia, with whom we work together on all these color studies. And of course, there are many more of us involved. We have over, as I said, 100 international collaborators and local collaborators, students. So it's a big team effort to arrive at these results. So thank you very much, and I will be looking forward to your questions.